Imagine voting for change and waking up to soldiers in your streets, the internet gone, and the same president declared winner after nearly 40 years. This is Uganda's 2026 election, and the story they didn't want the world to see. We'll take you inside the chaos, the bravery of ordinary citizens, and the shocking truth behind an election the world barely saw. So make sure you subscribe now and turn on notifications, because you'll want to see every moment of this story. Stay with us until the end, because what happened in Uganda in just 3 days will shock you and reveal how power really works when no one dares to leave office. At 6 a.m., Ugandans lined up to vote for hope. By midnight, they were running from bullets. By morning, the internet was gone. And by the next day, the same man had won again. This is the story of an election that was never meant to be fair. In January 2026, millions of Ugandans believed this vote could change their lives. Instead, it showed how power works when a leader refuses to leave after nearly 40 years in office. An 81-year-old ruler, a nation full of young people, a shutdown meant to hide the truth, a country forced into silence. The day began like many others in Uganda. Roosters crowed in the early morning. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Women swept the dust from their doorsteps. Children prepared for school. But this day was different. This day was election day. Across Kampala, in towns like Gulu, Bale, Barara, Jinja, and in small villages where roads are still dirt and electricity comes only at night, people woke up before sunrise. They wore their best clothes. Some wrapped themselves in sweaters against the cold morning air. Others carried umbrellas to block the sun that would soon rise. At polling stations, long lines formed. People greeted each other quietly. Some joked, some prayed, some just stared ahead, lost in thought. For many, this election was not about politics. It was about food on the table. It was about school fees. It was about rent. It was about hospital bills. It was about dignity. Uganda is a young country. Most of its people are under 30. Many were born long after the current president came to power. They have never known another leader. To them, the president is not a man. He is a system. Yoweri Museveni has ruled Uganda since 1986. Before many Ugandans were born, he came to power after leading a 5-year guerrilla war. The country was broken then. Dictators had destroyed it. Violence had ruled it. The economy had collapsed. Museveni promised a new Uganda. He promised peace. He promised democracy. He promised a future. At first, people believed him. The war ended. Roads were repaired. Schools reopened. The country became stable again. Western leaders praised him. Investors trusted him. Uganda became a symbol of recovery. But slowly, power began to harden around him. Term limits were removed. Age limits were removed. Opposition voices were silenced. The army became loyal to the president, not the constitution. Elections kept happening, but the results never changed. Year after year, Museveni won. And now, in 2026, he was 81 years old and running again. But this time, something felt different. Uganda's youth were restless. Life had become expensive. Jobs were hard to find. Many graduates stayed home for years without work. Corruption was everywhere. Bribes were normal. Connections mattered more than talent.
Young people wanted change. They gathered at rallies, they sang, they danced, they listened to speeches that spoke about freedom, fairness, and a better future. The opposition leader became a symbol of that hope. He spoke the language of the streets. He talked about police violence, rising prices, and stolen opportunities. He looked like the people. He sounded like the people. The government watched closely, and they grew nervous. As election day approached, opposition rallies were blocked. Supporters were arrested. Tear gas filled the air. Police trucks followed campaign convoys. Roads were blocked. The message was clear. You can vote, but don't challenge power. Still, on January 15th, people came out. They stood in long lines under the sun. They waited patiently. They whispered about change. They prayed. They smiled. In a small town near Masaka, a young woman named Aisha stood in line with her mother. It was her first time voting. "I want a better life," she said softly. "I want a job. I want to help my family." Her mother nodded. "We have waited long enough." In Gulu, an old man named Okello leaned on his walking stick as he waited. He remembered the days of war. He remembered hiding in the bush. He remembered when Museveni first came to power. "We believed in him," he said. "We thought he would leave when his work was done." In Kampala, a university graduate named Brian stood with his friends. He had finished school 2 years ago, but still had no job. "I don't want to leave my country," he said, "but I want a future." Then, as voting began, the internet disappeared. WhatsApp stopped working. Facebook vanished. Twitter went silent. News websites refused to load. Uganda had entered another shutdown. When the internet goes off, fear goes up. People could not share photos. They could not send videos. They could not call relatives in other towns. They could not tell the world what they were seeing. The country had been locked in silence. Inside polling stations, some people voted freely. In others, soldiers stood nearby. In some areas, ballot papers arrived late. In others, voting was delayed. In others, voting never happened. But no one could report it because the internet was gone. In some villages, people waited for hours only to be told the polling station had closed. In some towns, people complained that their names were missing from the voter list. In others, people whispered that ballot boxes had been moved in the night. But there was no way to confirm anything because Uganda was offline. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became heavy. People wiped sweat from their faces. Children cried. Old women sat on stones to rest. Still, they waited.
Because this vote mattered. In the afternoon, rumors began to spread. In one district, people said soldiers had beaten a man for filming with his phone. In another, people said ballot boxes were being guarded by armed men. In another, people said voting had been stopped completely. But rumors were all people had, because the internet was gone. As evening came, tension grew. People gathered around radios. Families huddled around small televisions. Streets emptied. Shops closed early. In many homes, people did not cook dinner. They were too anxious. They waited for news. Then came the gunshots. In some neighborhoods, security forces clashed with groups of young people. In others, police chased protesters. People ran. Doors slammed shut. Mothers pulled children inside. In Kampala, the opposition leader's home was surrounded. Security forces arrived late at night. Armored vehicles blocked the roads. Soldiers took positions. Then came the raid. Gunfire rang out. Neighbors screamed. People hid under beds. Others jumped over fences. The opposition leader escaped. He went into hiding. Across the country, fear spread. In some areas, young men gathered in the streets, angry and shouting. In others, people stayed inside, too scared to move. By morning, at least 7 people were dead. Families searched hospitals. Friends searched police stations. Mothers cried. Still, the internet remained off. Uganda was blind. Uganda was mute. Uganda was alone. In the town of Jinja, a shopkeeper named Sarah opened her store slowly. She listened to the radio as she arranged her goods. "They say people died last night," she said. "Why must it always be like this?" In Male, a teacher named Peter walked the school. Many students were absent. "They are afraid," he said. "Their parents kept them home." In a village near Hoima, a farmer named Moses sat under a tree with his neighbors. "We voted," he said. "But did our votes matter?" No one answered. On January 17th, the Electoral Commission made its announcement. Yoweri Museveni had won. Over 73% of the vote. Again, for the 7th time. State television played patriotic songs. Government officials smiled. Soldiers saluted. Fireworks lit up the sky. But on the streets, there was no celebration. People stared at their phones. Still no internet. People shook their heads. They had seen this before. They knew how it worked. When you control the army, you control the streets. When you control the police, you control fear. When you control the courts, you control justice. When you control the media, you control the story. When you control the Electoral Commission, you control the result.
Elections become theater. The script is written long before voting day. In Kampala, Brian watched the announcement on a neighbor's TV. "They think we are fools," he said. Do they think we don't see what is happening? In Masaka, Aisha sat with her mother. So nothing has changed? She asked. Her mother sighed. Not today. In Gulu, Okello turned off the radio. I have seen many presidents, he said, but I have never seen one leave by choice. For many Ugandans, the result was not a surprise, but the pain was still real. They felt cheated. They felt powerless. They felt angry. Young people asked their parents, will anything ever change? Parents had no answers. They remembered when Museveni was young and full of promises. They remembered believing in him. Now they were watching history repeat itself. A leader who stayed too long. A system that served a few. A nation paying the price. Under Museveni's long rule, Uganda had grown, but not for everyone. Corruption had become normal. Public debt had risen. Youth unemployment was high. Hospitals were underfunded. Teachers were underpaid. In many villages, women still walked long distances for clean water. In many towns, young men sat idle on street corners. In many schools, students shared textbooks. Yet government officials drove luxury cars. Politicians built mansions. Powerful families controlled business. The gap between the rich and the poor grew wider every year. Museveni once said African leaders should not cling to power. Now he was the symbol of exactly that. A president who had ruled longer than most Ugandans had been alive. An old man leading a young nation. A government afraid of its own people. But despite fear, despite violence, despite silence, Ugandans still voted. That alone was courage. It takes bravery to stand in line when soldiers are watching. It takes bravery to speak when people are being arrested. It takes bravery to hope when hope is dangerous. In the days after the election, the internet slowly returned. Messages flooded phones, videos spread, photos appeared, stories came out. People saw what had happened in other towns. They saw the soldiers, they saw the crowds, they saw the fear. The truth could no longer be hidden. But the result did not change. The president was sworn in again. The flags were raised, the speeches were made, the music played. And life went on. Children went back to school, parents went back to work, markets reopened, buses filled the roads. But something inside the people had changed. They had tasted hope, and they had tasted disappointment. They would not forget.